Welcome back to the January 26, 2023 meeting of the Business Operations Committee of the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission. Trajan, would you please take a roll call of commissioners to reconvene after our recess?
Commissioner Carter?
Present.
Commissioner Smith?
Present.
Commissioner Woodson? Here. We have 3 of 3 commissioners present. We have quorum.
Chairman,
Yes.
may I interrupt you for half a second?
Yes.
Because since we had all these moving parts, I want to take this opportunity as the commission chair to welcome you and to welcome Chris Tudor. We'll talk some more tomorrow, but I got reminded by my good friend on the left is that we ought to at least acknowledge and say, we're glad you're here, we appreciate your service, and you've jumped right in, and we'll have more to say tomorrow. So thank you.
I'm going to hold you to those words. But thank you, Commissioner. The Business Operations Committee will consider 2 items on the agenda today. First, we will hear the Executive Director's operational update. Next, the Commissioner's Director of Finance and Operation, Melanie, will discuss the fiscal year 2022 authorizes fee report and fiscal 2023 budget of actuals, as well as the fiscal 2024 budget update. Do we have any questions or comments on the agenda before we move to vote for approval? Any questions? Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
It's been
Second.
properly moved and second. Those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed, no. John, would you please have a roll call?
Commissioner Carter?
Present?
Commissioner
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Commissioner Woodson?
Aye.
The motion is approved.
Minutes of the meeting held on October the 17th, 2022 have been provided. Does anyone have any comments or edits to make regarding the prior minutes before we proceed?
Mr. Chairman, having reviewed the minutes, I move that we approve them as they are in our packet.
Properly moved and second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. Motion carries. The first item on our agenda is an operational update from our Executive Director, Tess. Tess, you're recognized.
Thank you so much. I'm Tess Stovall, Executive Director, and I'm excited to be in front of our new Business Operations Chair. Again, we are thankful for people who are willing to jump into the work, and you certainly are living up to that expectation. So first, I wanted to touch base on some changes in staffing that we've had since the last operational update to this committee. So Chase Engel, who is our Director of External Affairs, left the commission at the end of December to join the General Assembly as staff member to represent William Lambert. So we're so thrilled for his new job. And as a result, we've hired a new Director of External Affairs, Hayden Pendergrass, who is, I think, on probably like day 8 with us. And we're excited to welcome him into the fold and get him up to speed with the work. Secondly, I wanted to note some ongoing procurement activities that we have done in the last, since our last conversation. So we're continuing to work through the procurement process on Elevation. And Elevation is the system that we as a school district use to house all of our individualized learning plans for our English language students. This is a system that many districts across the state utilize because it allows for both ease of access to those plans, but also ease of transfer of those plans between districts. We do have to go through a pretty extensive procurement process with central procurement. I will note that both Drajan Cummings and Melanie Harrell are leading this work for our district and our agency. This is a system that is very important to our schools that we have and that they utilize significantly. And so because of the lengthy procurement process that we have to go through, we've started very early to get it ready for FY24. The next update that I have for you all is around office space. I think that we've been talking about office space for the last 2 years, and I'm excited to say that we have a moved timeline and date. Some of the commissioners had the opportunity to go up and look at the space before we got started today. And we are really excited that by the end of February, we will be up on the 8th floor. I highly suggest that other commissioners pop up there before, if they have time today or tomorrow, just so they can see the space. The updated rent for that space is already factored into our FY23 budget. It is a slight increase from what we're currently paying, but that's something that we've already factored into. And as I shared at a previous committee meeting, General Services has already allocated additional space for us that as the staff grows and expands, we have the space up on the 8th floor to accommodate any additional staff capacity. So I'm really excited to be upstairs soon enough. And then finally, my last update is with regard to commission meetings and commission meeting locations, as this is one of the charges of this committee. So in March, we are going to be having our commission meetings at the Ellington Agricultural Center, which is in Southeast Davidson County. The reason that we pick there is, number one, finding space downtown is challenging. And also, number two, it's going to allow us to be very close to several of our authorized charter schools. So we're going to be able to build in very specific time in our meeting schedule to visit those schools. So more to come, but I'm excited about that opportunity for the commission. For our July meeting, based on feedback that we got from commissioners in this committee, we are looking to take the commission meeting to Memphis. More to come. We look forward to the Memphis commissioners hosting us. And actually, all of my Memphian staff are very excited. We're going to go on a tour. But we're really excited to be able to take the commission meeting across the state and be able to potentially visit some schools while we're down there. And then finally, we're working on a location for our October meeting. We are still thinking about, is that an out-of-town meeting? I also want to note that we are going to be looking at the number of applications that are filed for charter schools as of the beginning of February and start mapping out what does our New Start appeal process look like, and do we need to think about going ahead and scheduling a second meeting like we did this past fall so that we can divide up the appeals that we hear based on the volume that we might have. So more to come on that front. We're still working to finalize both locations and timeline, but I did want to reference that for you all, and I hope to have a more clear update either at March or before March. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Y'all want to go first? Tess, I hope as you all look at the October part, because I think it was helpful last year where some of us as commissioners, because we broke it into two, had an opportunity to actually go and sit into some of the public hearings. I think potentially some of the same applicants may be back. I think for commissioners, it is really an invaluable lesson to actually sit there, listen to the presentation, because it's somewhat different, to hear the school system's comments, and then to see the public, that shows up, and so you get a real feel for whether these are people that have been brought there, or these are people who are there because they really have a concern and care for the children and the opportunity. So I would hope as you look at this, that we leave that opportunity for commissioners to maybe have that same experience, because for me it was very valuable last year.
Absolutely, and we will be looking very closely at the timeline of appeals, when we might receive them, both in terms of public hearing scheduling, and then also if we are going to split them up, what does that look like in terms of workload?
Mr. Chairman, just a couple of things. So, Tess, as we look at that October, I like the fact that you're looking possibly out of town, but, I think we need to weigh what our caseload is going to be, because it doesn't seem practical if we have the same type of workload to drag our staff and everything that wouldn't be needed all over the state. So I'm fine with waiting to make that decision until after. The fact that we're going to Shelby County in July, we can look at another time that's less hectic to go to the other Grand Division. So I appreciate that. Congratulations on the office. I mean, I feel like we've been trying to drag this snowball uphill for way too long. You got to see it, so thank you. And looking through this, and Melanie, we'll get to you in just a second. I do want to make a recommendation that we look at adding a budget line item in here. We can put it under staff incentives, which would be tar and feather for anyone who tries to leave the staff. And we need to start with Chase as an example, so that, again, it can fit under staff incentives. So, But no, I just appreciate everything that you all have done. It's been a long road to get here, and this last year we had an extremely heavy workload, less us, this committee than some of the others. But again, I've looked at all the financial data, and where we hoped we would be, almost, Mr. Chairman, both Mr. Chairmans. 3 years ago, when we first convened to start this process, not realizing that a global pandemic was only 30 days away, that we were going to have to hire an executive director virtually, most of our staff virtually, start this whole process virtually. And to see that here we are almost 3 years into it and looking at the financials, we are within a hair of being able to be fully self-sustaining and off of, that $1.5 million from the General Assembly, which is meeting the charge that they gave us, I think is a testament to the hard work that, I'm looking at you, Melanie, as our fiscal director, and Tess, you as the executive director, that you all have done in really helping to lead this, lead our staff. And, sitting here, I don't want to speak for everybody, but what I hoped we would accomplish is exactly what you all have fulfilled 3 years almost to the date later. So just looking, Drejon, Ashley, Tess, going down the line, Maggie, thank you all, well, except you, Hayden, I'm going to task you with tar and feathering Chase. But, I just want to say thank you all for the hard work that you all have done on our behalf and for the students of this state.
Excellent. Else? Thank you, Tess. These operational updates are beneficial for the commissioners to stay up to date with the agency. And again, I'll ask again, are there any additional comments or questions that anyone has for Tess? Next item on our agenda today will be the budget updates from Melanie. Melanie will present the fiscal year 2022 budget, authorizes fee report, provide the fiscal 2023 budgets to actuals, and will present the fiscal 2024 budget update. Melanie, you're recognized.
Thank you so much, Chairman Carter. I'm excited to have you on board as well. So first, I want to talk a little bit about the authorizer fee refund, and I think it's important since we've got some new folks here that we kind of set the context around our authorizer fee a little bit. So as a reminder for the committee, the authorizer fee is set at 3% of BEP revenue, which will be moving under TISA. But pursuant to state statute, we have submitted our FY22 authorizer fee reports to the Department of Education, and it outlines all of our expenditures that we made last fiscal year under the authorizer fee. So this is in your materials. It's also on our website, and we did provide this as well as a memo to our schools to make sure that they were aware. So for FY22 and FY23, as a reminder, as part of the ASD transition legislation and that process, the Department of Education provided us with about $1 million in federal GEAR funding. So we've had access to that last fiscal year and this fiscal year, and so with being able to offset some of our authorizing costs using those dedicated federal funds, we were able to provide a refund of approximately $200,000 to our schools, which is a little less than 30% of the fee that was collected. So what that means is that the effective authorizer fee that was used last year is actually just under 2% as of now. So I think we get a lot of questions from a lot of people about what does this 3% mean, what does it look like, and I think it's important to note how this refund process works and the way that this shakes out over time. There's a couple of other sort of practical nuances that go into the authorizer fee that I want to remind the committee of and as well as anybody that's listening. The first is that the authorizer fee amount is set at 3%, but there are some very practical limitations that prevent us from being able to sort of fully recognize that 3% in a fiscal year. So the first is that the real final BEP true-up for a previous fiscal year is typically not completed until well into the next fiscal year. This has always historically been after state books are already closed, and we don't actually have a mechanism at that point to recognize any previous year revenue at that point. So I know I put this in my memo, but I think that we received the final true-up in December of this year. This is actually a bit earlier than it's been in the past. I think last year we got it in March or April. But what that means is that we will never be able to sort of recognize any authorizer fee revenue on those final payments that are due to schools. The other thing that I want to highlight just as part of the process is that we also have to wait for the geographic LEA to cut us the check for the amount that's owed in any true-up payment. So as you can imagine, when you're getting things well into the next fiscal year, then you're waiting for payments and then processing payments to schools. It's a long, drawn-out process for both us and for our schools, who are often waiting for receivables from the previous fiscal year. So, for example, this year we got our final true-up information, and this morning there was some disagreement from some of our resident districts about if those amounts were correct, and we are going to have to kind of go back and revisit with them to make sure that we're all on the same page about what those final amounts were and what the next steps are. So I just want to acknowledge that there are these challenges for us and for our schools in being able to recognize this revenue to make sure that, again, everybody's sort of on the same page and that we're working closely with our partners on some of these nuances that come up and affect our ability to collect that revenue. I think in order to capture this, what we have tried to do historically is make sure that we are budgeting very conservatively, that we are using conservative sort of base student per pupil assumptions to make sure that we're capturing some of that. I will also note that we recently had our budget hearing with the Department of Finance and Administration a couple of months ago, and this was a very significant topic of discussion. So we spent a lot of time with them talking through these nuances, making sure they understood, the delay, the back-end accounting issues that can cause, and how we try to manage that as an agency and work with the TDOE to manage it as well. And so, as we've mentioned before, there is a clear expectation that we are moving to sustainability on our authorizer fee revenue alone. Really appreciate Commissioner Smith, your acknowledgement that we are trying to make sure that we are budgeting very conservatively and keeping track of these revenue assumptions very closely. But it is something that we know that we're moving away from a reliance on state funds over time, and this will be something that's increasingly important for us to keep a very close eye on. So I know we've discussed internally as a team, and I think in the future it may be a great idea to hear from the committee about how are we tracking these nuances? Do we need to think about a different way to present them to make sure that it's very clear how these nuances are captured, and that it's very clear kind of what the true authorizer fee rate depends on a lot of factors that often don't shake out until after the end of a fiscal year. So I know that was a lot. I'm happy to take any questions from the committee before we move on to the FY23 and FY24 budget.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, just on that point, I'm very familiar with the true-up delay and sort of the kind of lagging information. A suggestion would be, and I'm confident that you all would be doing this, would just be, as we go through the process, begin to internalize, like when we get the more accurate numbers, let's have that conversation so that we can begin to develop some muscle memory on what to expect. And I think it would also pop over time if there's an aberration in the data, if we've kind of gotten out of whack for some reason, so that we can at least have a conversation about it, or have a process where it'll pop. But it's very common, particularly at a startup, but that lagging information is what every school district in Tennessee experiences, and most states actually. So thank you for that explanation. One question that we don't have to have the answer for right now, but I believe our fee is really conservative and student focused. And so I would love to just understand how we compare to other authorizers. I can think of certain communities where up to 25% is retained by the district. Clearly not the case here, maybe 35%. And so would love to just get an understanding maybe at our next meeting about how that compares, because my suspicion is that it's a very conservative request that we are serving our students and making sure resources get straight to them.
I will say, Commissioner Woodson, something that we do very intentionally do is we make sure that we don't withhold any federal funds from our schools, and so we pass through 100% of our federal funds, which means that we're not sort of taking the con admin, which can frequently be 5% of sort of total federal allocation off the top, and that is something that I think is very atypical for an authorizer. So do want to call that out. And I also do want to shout out that at the beginning of the year, the TDOE was great at working with us to sort of address some of the bigger issues that we'd seen in terms of the amount of gap that was growing in the true-up process to get some information a little bit sooner. And that actually resulted in getting quite a bit of money in the millions of dollars for our schools much sooner than they would have been able to in the past. And so that was one step that we've taken, and that we were grateful the department took in working with us to try to at least get ahead of what we could at that point.
I might add, I would second the issue of trying to look at and seeing how we compare with other states as far as what that percentage authorizer fee would be. And I think that it's not only, I think, beneficial for us to hear that, but I think at the end of the day, in the conversation with the governor and with legislators, it's probably important, particularly when we're talking about fiscal issues and dealing with budgets, to say, but this is in terms of maybe how other states are, in fact, are looking at providing, again, funds, okay, to whoever, in fact, has oversight, again, over charter schools. So I do think if that's any way possible, maybe at our next meeting,
Absolutely.
we could look at maybe not all 50 states, but, you know, maybe the South and maybe the Midwest.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, one last question. And Melanie, I'm going ahead of you, looking at the FY24. I notice in there that there's no ESSER revenue, but the last I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, the state was still sitting on pretty significant resource funding of ESSER funds that districts had not been able to expend. I believe all of those have to be spent out by December the 31st of 2025, if memory serves me correct. So have you all had any conversations with TDOE about any ESSER funds that might be coming, even though they're not reflected in here?
Thank you, Commissioner Smith. We have not heard anything concrete about additional ESSER funding. I do know there are some flexibilities that are starting to be investigated at the federal level around timelines and some additional flexibilities for different funding streams. We have not gotten, I'm looking at Kelly to make sure she hasn't heard anything. I haven't. We have not gotten anything that would indicate any new funding, any additional funding, or anything of that nature. So we're internally planning for, those funds to be expended by September 30th of 2024 as a district. But we will wait and see and look closely at that. I think as I move on to the FY23 budget to actuals update, we have included this here, and we're under budget across our expenditure categories. This budget is included in your materials. We updated this to reflect updated enrollment information as well as the adjusted BEP rates from the first true-up in October. Since several schools' enrollment is under their initial enrollment projections for FY23, this resulted in slightly lower authorizer fee projections and BEP pass-through amounts. So again, we talk a lot about how important our enrollment projections are and how shifts in enrollment impacts our revenue. One thing I do want to highlight is that we have not yet received grant carryover from the Achievement School District for our 3 transitioning schools from last fiscal year. We are working very closely with them to try to make sure that that is coming along quickly, but that is why that projection has not been updated yet, is because we don't yet have that those carryover amounts. So next meeting, we will be able to provide an additional update kind of on how our grants are shaking out and on those funding projections as well. The one thing that I want to highlight as well is that we note where our revenue as we draw it down. We, as a state entity, have access to all of our revenue, but then go through basically a reimbursement process for it to actually be recorded in our books. Department of Education hasn't yet reported any of our BEP grant pass-through, so Gomer is working very closely with them on making sure all of that is recorded, and that we're in close contact with their staff to ensure everything is being reconciled over time. And we will give an additional update on that at our next committee meeting. We did discuss at our previous meeting that we internally really have a $650,000 reversion target, which we consider sort of our minimum, again, to reflect that we are doing what we can to move towards sustainability, and that we're reverting as much state funding as possible. And so I think we've talked before about where you see surplus, you're really talking about reversion, since we don't have the ability to carry forward funding, whether it be state funding or authorizer fee refunds. And so we are still on track for our $650,000 reversion target, which we feel very good about. Again, wanting to make sure that we're being responsive to the requests of the General Assembly. And for FY24, I provided what is really just a draft meant to give an example of how much variance we are currently looking at for next year. So currently, we do not have any TISA projections from the Department of Education. So we have not been able to sort of run any initial TISA revenue adjustments. I think there are also some things that will be figured out during legislative session and coming down the pipeline related to that. And so our hope is that we will be able to provide a much more detailed budget update in March. But I did want to provide just sort of two different scenarios about how our enrollment could impact our revenue. Some of that will depend on votes of the full commission coming up in our next couple of days. But I wanted to just provide us some additional information about how enrollment impacts our revenue assumptions, as well as the fact that we are still waiting for TISA projections as a district. So with that, I'm happy to take questions about either the FY22 or FY24 updates.
Talk a little bit about projections. That's really important information.
Thank you, Commissioner Woodson. Yes, it is very important. I think we will hopefully have them soon, but I don't have any more information than that to share at this time.
Tess, this question's really going to be for you because I don't want to ask Melanie this one. Looking at the salary, I see there is a small increase. Is that reflective of what the General Assembly did last year, or is that something that we have to budget internally? And the reason I ask is, as we continue to look at just the pressures of inflation and what it's doing, I want to make sure our staff is taken care of. So I want to make sure that that's adequate to meet our staff's needs.
Yes, thank you for that question. So in the last 6 months, we've both worked with Finance and Administration to move money above the line, as well as we, as a part of the executive branch, were impacted by large GOHR's salary adjustments that came through in December. So I personally have been working very closely with our chair and also with HR to ensure that both we are reflective of kind of the expectations of the work within our salaries, and also the increase of work in our salaries and in our roles, as well as what changes DOHR just made broad scale to different salary classes. That's also reflected in our budget as well.
All right, thank you so much. I think that's all I have if there's no more.
Well, thank you for regarding the authorizers fee and the agency budget. Lastly, again, any other questions for Melanie? There it is. As we conclude, thank you all for your attendance and participation in this meeting. And let me be more specific, the Business Operations Committee of the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission. At this time, I would like to ask if there are any final comments from anyone.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure, did our full commission chairman make you aware that as chair of this committee that you have to buy dinner for everyone tonight?
No.
Oh, well, then I'm sorry that he neglected to give you that information. No, I'm just kidding. But
I have my wife's debit card, so it's
okay, then we're not charging that. I'm not getting in trouble with your wife, too. But no, I just want to say welcome on board. We're glad to have you, and, look forward to serving with you these next few years.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and we also, I think, also need to say welcome to Chris, who's joining me as a new commissioner. If there are no further comments, do I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Is there a second? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Do you want to take the vote?
Commissioner Carter? Commissioner Smith?
Yes.
Commissioner Woodson? Aye. The motion's approved.
Thank you. The next meeting of the business.
That's the way they run it.
Just hold on.
Yeah, you're
We're
good.
not going anywhere yet, okay?
Chris is ready.
Chris, dinner's not till 6 o'clock. It's okay. I know you had a long drive up. We'll feed you, promise. Thank you. The next meeting of the Business Operations Committee is March the 23rd, 2023. I look forward to seeing you all at the full commission meeting tomorrow morning. We stand adjourned. Thank you.
We'll take a break and return at